and there's habitat for the pollinators, for the birds, for lots of mammals, different animals that use the area. It's providing food and shelter. Okay, so there's all of that, but beyond that, there's been this connection that's occurred between various community members and goodwill and sense of love and affection that now exists, for example, between the trustees of the site, many of whom are Methodists, and they have an entirely different view of Mormons than before we did this project, because in our community, often Latter-day Saints are not necessarily held in high regard, and sometimes there's some pretty negative prejudices about us as a faith group. So I've often heard at our events comments by people where they'll say, wow, I didn't know Mormons cared about the environment. I had no idea, that you guys are like sort of normal.
Welcome to Holy Earth, where we explore the intersection of faith and earth stewardship. I'm your host, Lydia Theobald.
And I'm your host, Phil Fernberg.
Today we have three great guests from Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship chapters around the world. Merikay Smith, this is a hard name to say, I don't speak German. Ralf Grünke, was that pretty good? Was that okay?
I think that was pretty good. Ralf Grünke, yeah.
Okay. And Mike Maxwell, who's also our executive producer. They'll be sharing their experiences with interfaith collaboration and creation care.
I am very excited for this episode. We know, Lydia, we've talked about my role as chair of Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship over the global organization, and so I know and love these people very much as leaders of chapters, but also I'm very excited for this specific intersection between interfaith service and the shared principles of stewardship. So I really am looking forward to the conversation. But first, before we do that, we want to cut over to our producer, Marcia, for this episode's stewardship story. Hi, Marcia.
So fun to have Marcia on screen. She's always doing so much behind the scenes, so we're excited to hear her voice today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. So the story that I have for you today is one that has been going on for 40 years. Wow. And it's the International Coastal Cleanup organized by the Ocean Conservancy. And most of the cleanup events take place in September.
Oh yeah, and a lot of our chapters have participated in this over the years. I think I went to one last year. I've heard about it every year, so really cool.
Yeah, it's true. Our chapters in Germany, New York, Boston, the Mid-Atlantic, Utah Valley, and St. George all had coastal cleanups in September. So you don't have to live near the ocean to participate in the coastal cleanup. The purpose of it is to keep trash, and especially plastic trash, out of our waterways. So we're talking about lakes, rivers, creeks, oceans, all the waterways. So in the 40 years of its existence, the International Coastal Cleanup has seen 19 million volunteers collect more than 400 million pounds of trash, and this is all over the globe. For example, this year there were flagship cleanup events in Alaska, Florida, and Washington, D.C., but there were also events on every continent except Antarctica. And the thing I love about this movement is it brings together all types of people, every age, every background, every belief system, because all kinds of people care about the waterways that we depend on.
So cool. I feel like in the different cleanups I've done, there's always people who are way older than me, people who are way younger than me, and it is so cool to see a multi-generational, diverse group of people coming together to help clean up.
So if people want to find out more about the International Coastal Cleanup, we have a link in the show notes where you can look at a map and you can see all the different events that have taken place around the world. And they also have some fun statistics about the trash they've collected and even a list of some of the weird things that people have picked up.
Well, that story is a great setup for our interviews today because we're going to talk about finding common cause in service and in a way that transcends differences, especially the boundaries that might exist between religions or major belief systems. For those who don't know much about Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship, I thought it would be a good moment to take some time and talk about it, talk about our mission. So we know that LDSES is the supporter of this podcast, but we don't always try to make it the forward, most facing thing of the podcast, because the podcast itself is really about stories and conversation, and many of which don't always necessarily have to be part of LDS Earth Stewardship's structure. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit that started as a ragtag group of academics and other engaged Earth stewards in the Intermountain West to raise better awareness of the deep doctrines of Earth stewardship within Latter-day Saint tradition. From that small Google group all the way now to a global nonprofit. And we have local chapters. So you mentioned, Lydia, these people we're going to talk to are leaders of local chapters. Local chapters, the idea of this sprang up as an idea to help us be more global in our view of action on Earth stewardship, because we were originally only really focused in Utah. We had some incredible members or supporters of Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship in other parts of the world who said, well, we want to do things where we're at too. So why don't we start these local groups? At the time is what they called them. And now it's evolved into what we call local chapters. We have more than a dozen that are all around the world and on multiple continents. And we are really excited to have some of the leaders of those chapters on today. And every chapter does something a little different. So some of them focus on service activities, on things like coast or lake or river cleanups, things like restoring native plant gardens. Others are much more focused on meeting with people and collaboration and having sort of big think groups together on a big issue regarding the environment, Earth stewardship, and the doctrines of their faith traditions. So we have quite a wide variety of things that people do. And so we're really excited to talk to some of the leaders of those chapters and say what they are doing in the interfaith realm today. So let's introduce our first guest. Merikay Smith is from Darnestown, Maryland, is the chair of our Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship Mid-Atlantic chapter, which is one of our earliest chapters. Hi, Merikay.
Hey, I love that you mentioned the intercoastal cleanup because, we helped with it out here. And you asked, what are some of the weird things that get found? This plastic pig, honestly, I didn't find it in this last pickup that I did a week ago, but it's something that I found in one of our pickups. We have found all kinds of crazy things you wouldn't believe, which I won't take the time to talk about here, but lots of weird things show up in the trash. Or, people just throw things, and I don't know what they think happens to them. I mean, if there weren't volunteers coming to clean it up, there's a lot of bad stuff that ends up washing into our rivers, and then here it would go to the bay and then the ocean.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you found something kind of fun and cool. And also, looks so beautiful right now. What a beautiful little, is this your backyard that you're in?
That's why I decided to sit outside, yeah.
Oh, so beautiful. Yeah, I used to live in Maryland, so it's making my heart happy seeing how green it is over there. So beautiful. So we'd love to just hear your stewardship journey. How have you come to love the earth? How did you become involved with earth stewardship? What's inspired you on this journey?
Well, it came pretty naturally to me. My parents and grandparents on both sides were all very much into gardening and hiking and rock collecting, just spending time outside, and really always expressed their gratitude to God for the amazing things that surround us. But specifically and related to our topic, in 2015, the Pope put out a letter to the world. And the point he makes in this encyclical over and over again is when you're caring for the earth, you're also caring for the others, especially other humans who share this earth with us. There's so much suffering that we may be not really directly aware of, but that is caused across the globe. People who really suffer through the harms that come from bad environmental choices that we collectively are making. So that was a change to me. And I contacted LDS Earth Stewardship. At that point, it was just something online. There were no local chapters. And they would once or twice a year have an event, but it was always either in Salt Lake or Provo. And I talked to Brigham Daniels, who was then the president, and I said, there's a pretty big place. And would you consider letting me start a local chapter here in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area? Well, it took a little bit of time because this was kind of a radical idea, and there were, it had to be discussed, and we had to create a memorandum of understanding. But eventually we were able to launch our first local chapter, which makes me really happy that we were the first ones to do this. So in the spring of 2016, the Mid-Atlantic chapter was launched.
Merikay, so many things I am so excited to comment on. And I love Pope Francis's encyclical. It's called Laudato Si for our listeners. If you look it up, it is a gorgeous piece of writing. Really, really worth the read.
So one thing I'll just mention is anybody who is interested in the encyclical and haven't yet read it, you could read the entire thing, which I would actually recommend. But if you're short of time, you could go to the website for our little local chapter. The address is easy. It's eartheast.org. And if you look under inspiration, we have a link there. And what I did is this is kind of nervy, but I went through the encyclical and condensed it. It's sort of a Reader's Digest condensed version. And I added pictures to support what the text said. So I think it's a little bit, I'm self-promoting here, but it's an engaging way to have a first interaction with this encyclical.
Yeah, we'll link that in the show notes because that sounds like a great way to get all the most important parts.
I think it's so fitting because Laudato Si, another thing for people to know if you haven't read it, the subtitle on it is On Care for Our Common Home. And the address is actually not specifically to Catholics. It's an address to all inhabitants of the earth. It's for anyone who lives and enjoys the bounties of the earth should be caring about earth stewardship. And so it's so fitting to me for what we're kind of wanting to talk about with you is not only in the formation of the chapter over there, but in some of your most formative projects that you've done. The whole thing has really had this thread of interfaith collaboration and interfaith understanding about the need for creation care. Could you tell us a little bit more about some of those formative experiences in interfaith collaboration in Earth Stewardship East?
Sure. We created a native plant garden on an historic African-American site called Pleasant View. On this property, which is along a very major, heavily used highway, it was previously 3 acres of just mostly mown weeds and very few plants. And we got permission from the trustees to do this native garden that's quite large, 3 large beds. We planted about 30 trees and also a sign bed area. We got $25,000 from the Chesapeake Bay Trust Foundation to fund buying the plants, and then all the labor was volunteer labor. And we've had more than 450 volunteers help us on different projects, both planting and then maintaining the garden. It's been a really exciting thing to be part of, and I've met the most interesting people by doing this project. It's really enriched my life in ways I didn't anticipate. I thought of it, when you plan something like this, you might think of it as primarily from the environmental side of things, like, oh, this is great, this property is close to a stream, so we're capturing water that otherwise would have run off when it rained and not be particularly clean because it's near this heavily used highway. And now instead it's like a big sponge, and the water is held there, and there's habitat for the pollinators, for the birds, for lots of mammals, different animals that use the area. It's providing food and shelter. Okay, so there's all of that, but beyond that, there's been this connection that's occurred between various community members, and goodwill and sense of love and affection that now exists, for example, between the trustees of the site, many of whom are Methodists, and they have an entirely different view of Mormons than before we did this project. Because in our community, more generally, often Latter-day Saints are not necessarily held in high regard, and sometimes there's some pretty negative prejudices about us as a faith group. So I've often heard at our events comments by people where they'll say, wow, I didn't know Mormons cared about the environment. I had no idea, that you guys are like sort of normal. It's always kind of fun to hear the things that come out as we're working
Yeah.
together. Or really, Mormons know how to work hard and they're reliable volunteers. There's just a lot of good that happens when you work together with your neighbors and especially this bringing together people of different faiths to do something good.
So you mentioned that you've met a lot of really interesting people. Could you share some memorable experiences of interesting people that you've met in your interfaith work?
So at Pleasant View, I've gotten to know the trustees, and among those trustees are some really special people. Pearl Green, who died this year at age 106. She was such a pleasure to know because she was just, I don't know, it's hard, you have to have known her. I feel it's a gift to me to have been able to know her. At 106, she was still completely alert and aware of her world. She could remember my name and knew my background. I mean, like even when during COVID, there were periods of time where I hadn't seen her for quite a while. I stopped by her house and brought her some flowers, and I thought, oh, I'll have to tell her who I am. And she's right away, oh, Merikay from the garden. I mean, anyway, so to know somebody at that age who's so gracious and beautiful, she's just a lovely person. It's hard to say exactly, but just like a really unique individual to have gotten to know her. And so when we would have our volunteer events, I always tried to have trustees there who could talk about the history. So on this site, we have the original AME church. This property was purchased right after the Civil War by freed slaves. So they built a church, they built a school, and that school is still there. And it was the colored school for our whole area. And it was the colored school well into, like my lifetime. There are people who remember going to that school, including Pearl. And to be able to have somebody who can remember growing up in the 20s as an African American child and what it was like, and to talk about it at these events, and especially bringing children in as volunteers to our events, or we had scouts come, school soccer groups, all kinds of people coming of different ages, and to have them be able to interact and learn firsthand about what it was like. So, for example, this school was burned down in the early 1900s. There were a lot of black schools that were burnt. And also the state was supposed to provide funding to rebuild the school, but they didn't, even though they promised that they would. And instead, they built a new school for the white kids, and they were able to jack up and just roll this old structure. So the structure that's there is quite old, and it's still there. And they've been able to renovate the physical structures of both the church and the school because they were no longer structurally sound. And our having worked on that garden and brought all these volunteers in helped make the case that the community generally, not just specifically the people who were the trustees and their families, but that the larger community cared enough about it was worth putting money into saving these historic places. So that's a bit of an aside. But to get to know Pearl and her brother, Tompkins, I've got a picture of him. It's one of my favorites. I took it at one of our volunteer events inside the school, and he's talking to the other volunteers about his experiences. He's a World War II veteran and helped with civil rights, from that. And he always, he's now 101, and he drives himself. He lives quite a distance, and he drives himself to the events, and he always gets a shovel and is out there digging and actually weeding and doing work besides being present. So, and then to get to know the next generation down, Pearl's son, Reverend Jerry Green, he is the head trustee there. But what I didn't know when we got started with this project, he was very high in the Methodist Church in terms of a leader, kind of sort of equivalent to like a general authority. He was a supervisor over about 80 Methodist churches, all the Methodist churches in our suburban Maryland area. And so quite a significant person in his own right. And again, as kind of an aside, this builds bridges for the church. So, and specifically in the context of African Americans, there's sometimes negative feelings about the church because of our history. And it's been really good to have been able to build this really strong connection with someone who's a leader in the United Methodist Church.
What do you think are some of the most important for interfaith outcomes that we're getting from these kinds of collaborations?
Well, I think there's like this wonderful possibility for synergisms to happen. So like what we do and what the other faith groups do can be even better when we can work together to accomplish things. And there is this, and it's not really quantifiable, but this affection and unity that can come and carry, that's so important in I think especially in our world today, to be able to build bonds between peoples where you care about each other. Recently in the news, there have been some really horrible and violent events that were related to our church. And I've had people contact me who are not part of our church, but who I've gotten to know through interfaith service with their concerns about our members and what's happened. And they feel it more personally, they say, because of having known us and worked together. And so, and just as likewise, I would feel, say, if our local synagogue were attacked. So there's just so much that's good that comes from being able to work together. You may be familiar with the nonprofit Interfaith Power and Light.
Mm-hmm.
They have offices all over, and there's an Interfaith Power and Light that's for this region. And even before our very first meeting, they put together little handouts and a number of different things that they had multiple copies of and brought to our first meeting that were about Latter-day Saint teachings relative to creation. It was like spot on. They had quotes from the Doctrine and Covenants, from prior prophets, lovely images, and I put this all together as a way to sort of help us in getting our group started. And our interactions have continued like in different ways. For example, we have the beautiful National Cathedral here in Washington, D.C. It's where often funerals for presidents are held and other really important events. And every year for Earth Day, they tend to have a major celebration in honor of Earth Day. And through my connections with the president or the local leader of Interfaith Power and Light, I was able to be part of one of these Earth Day celebrations, and with the permission of the church, shared a video that the church had put together. It's currently on the church's website under the essays on different topics. So there's a nice essay and a short video on stewardship and conservation. And so this 1.5-minute video was used to start the service at the National Cathedral, part of the service. It was just a nice way of kind of being able to be part of this larger community, and it was seen by thousands of people. Anyway, so there's just lots of good things. It's hard. You get me started.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like you're building Zion, like that's how we do it. It's about getting everyone connected, getting everyone involved.
When I do these events, it really is about stewardship, right? But at Pleasant View, on one of our events, there was somebody who came who was investigating the church, and this was the first thing that they had come to. And this person happened to be African American and happened to be related to one of the trustees who was there on the property, and some of his family are buried at this property where we're doing this work. And after that, he took the lessons from the missionaries and was baptized.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like when you do things with people of other faiths, we don't do it with the goal of trying to have someone become baptized, but it just was sort of a natural outcome of the spirit he felt while we were there serving together.
So cool. Well, thank you for sharing all these beautiful stories. It's been so nice to meet you and talk with you. Before we transition to our next interview, we'd love to ask you just one of our signature questions that we ask all our guests. So, what is one thing that our listeners could start doing today that will bless the earth?
All right. Well, since we've already talked about it today, I would say, why don't you just go online if you haven't read the encyclical and
Mm.
either go to eartheast.org and read the short version or read the original, because I think if you do that, you'll be motivated to change. I mean, you'll think anytime you're buying something, is this something I really need? Because every time we make a purchase, for example, the Pope says every purchase, that's a choice to either be a steward or not be a steward. Help us. So I would say one thing would be encounter that document and think about it and see if it will impact your life.
Love that. That's a great idea. Well, thank you so much, Merikay, for being on and sharing your stories with us. It was incredible to have you. Okay, so let's go on a journey across the pond to Germany for our next guest. Ralf Grünke is from Niederau, Germany. He's the chair of the LDSES Germany chapter, which Merikay already mentioned was our second ever local chapter. Ralf, it's so good to see you and have you on.
Hi, it's nice to see you, Lydia and Phil. And it was very nice to see Merikay, who helped us get our Germany chapter off the ground. And I also do have a personal connection to Maryland. I lived in Silver Spring with my wife and our first son while completing an internship with the Library of Congress and then starting my first out of college job. So I do have a soft spot for Maryland.
Oh, small world. I was at Library of Congress too.
And Silver Springs is really close to College Park, where I lived for 5 years. So we've got all the connections.
We've all got DMV connections there. That's fun.
We love it. Yeah, well, we're so excited to hear more of your story today. And we'd love to start out just hearing, how did you become involved with Earth Stewardship? What's kind of your journey to caring for the Earth?
Well, growing up in Germany, developing an interest in the earth, in earth stewardship is not surprising. Environmental concerns had been around ever since I can remember. September actually marks the 50th anniversary of the publication of a book that for a long time served as kind of the Bible of the German environmental movement. Ein Planet wird geplündert, A Planet is Plundered by Herbert Gruhl. But you can even go 4 years further back to 71 when Germany sent Diese Welt. That's what the title of the Eurovision Song Contest entry was called, and it was the first entry in the contest that specifically addressed environmental concerns. But what started the journey of activism, of interest, of being actively involved in Earth stewardship, to me, was the Chernobyl nuclear disaster on April 26, 1986. From one day to the next, we were advised not to go outside to play soccer, not to eat wild mushrooms, not to eat venison. And I was only 14 at the time, but it started to get me thinking about the way we run our economy, we generate energy, big questions for a young kid. But it didn't start with with these big questions. I think the first act of activism was when I was around that age, and I started a neighborhood initiative to preserve a local playground from being developed into parking garages. Got some of the neighbors together. They decided that that young kid, that teenager, should be their spokesperson. I started giving interviews on the radio, to the local press, and we succeeded. We saved the playground back then and beat a big developer.
That's amazing. What an interesting, varied set of experiences that sort of led you to where you're at. So in those touch points of the early years sort of forming your stewardship ethic, into fast forward later when you're putting together this LDSES Germany chapter?
Well, I've been active in one way or another in Earth stewardship for many years. To some degree, it was also my faith that drove that interest. My parents joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints when I was only 5 years old, and they taught me certain things when it comes to relating to nature. My father always reminded me that carelessly, without any reason, pulling leaves off a tree would hurt the tree as much as it would hurt me if someone pulled off hair off my head. I think scientifically speaking, that's not 100% accurate. But that combined with what my mom told me to always be careful not to step on spiders, beetles, ants, helped me to understand that nature, that living beings can suffer and can be hurt. And later on, I connected that with what I learned in the Pearl of Great Price, where it says that all living creatures are also living souls. And then I heard about Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship. I signed up for the newsletter. I served on the global board for a period. Got up early in the morning or in the middle of the night to join meetings. And then a few years ago, we started the Germany chapter together with a few friends here.
You have been doing some interesting interfaith work. Could you tell us more about that and maybe tell us some of the interesting people you've met through interfaith collaborations?
Sure. Now, I'm heavily involved in interfaith dialogue, partly through work. My full-time job is with the church's communication department, and of course, my private activities are separate from that. I serve on the board of Grünke Germany as their secretary, and I serve as the chair of the Germany chapter of Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship. And in all of those realms, I am heavily involved in interfaith dialogue. Now, as the Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship chapter in Germany, we had a speaker from the Abrahamic Forum, which is an interfaith initiative, address us for an online lecture. But we also had in-person meetings with the local Baha'i community, where we explored what our holy writings, what our holy books stated on engaging with the environment, caring for God's creation. And our in-person event with the best turnout was when we had Rabbi Andrew Steinman address us. He's a much sought after speaker. He's just very engaging, very funny. Sometimes he does evenings where he does nothing but tell jokes from a Jewish cultural background. National newspaper once referred to him as an Orthodox rabbi in an unorthodox way. It was just great to hear his insights. And we have another meeting set up for later on this year where we will have a representative from the local Sikh congregation share his perspectives on caring for the earth.
For those that are not as familiar with those faith traditions, what have you learned?
I recently presented to a small interfaith group of progressives from various religious movements, and particularly the idea of stewardship rang a bell for Muslim friends, Jewish friends, other friends. When I talked to my Baha'i friends, the writings of Baha'u'llah also correlates with being a being a steward for the earth. It's just, to me, it's just a necessity. It's really difficult to tackle issues of earth stewardship and of peace and community building just in a silo. Many of your viewers or our viewers have probably heard of Hans Küng, the late Catholic theologian from Switzerland, who once said that there's no peace among the nations without peace among the religions, and that there's no peace among the religions without dialogue among the religions, and no dialogue among the religions without investigation of the foundation of the religions. Now, as Latter-day Saints, at least in the past, we sometimes called people who are interested in our faith investigators. But I agree, I side with Küng, who says that we all need to investigate the foundations of our religions. And then we notice that we have so much more in common when it comes to caring for the earth, caring for our communities, than what separates us.
Yeah, really cool. How do you feel that those connections across religious boundaries have changed you or changed other people?
The more you listen to, learn from, spend time on, serve side by side with internet friends. Well, let me change it to the first person. The more I do that, the more it helps me to see fellow human beings and friends first, and then someone who subscribes to a different faith. There's so many experiences I've had where I just noticed that if you do that, small and little things can happen that seem unlikely. I remember once being involved with helping organize a local Interfaith festival, and each of the faith groups involved had a little pavilion tent set up. Our ward was represented there too, and right next to us was the assigned spot for the Jewish congregation. And when my Jewish friend, who I've known for many years, showed up, he said, "The tent's already set up. We were supposed to do that ourselves. Do you know who did that?" And I told him, I think it was our Muslim friends. And he asked them, and they confirmed that. And just the fact that the Muslims set up the Jewish tent at that festival moved my heart.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, when we took down the tents, the smallest faith group there, it really just consisted of a couple, and struggled to take down their tent. I rushed over to help, but 4 people beat me. And at each of the 4 ends of the tent was a representative of a different faith. I think you had a Muslim, a Jew, a Baha'i, and a Christian help them take down their tent. And it's often little things that lead to bigger things in community building and peace building. But it starts with getting to know each other and listening to each other and understanding where the other person comes from.
That sounds like such a transcendent experience. Just that moment of you doing what you do at the end of an event, just you're trying to take something down, but you just had that little tiny moment, even if it just felt like it was in slow motion for a second or two.
It also leads to lasting connections with friends, with people. One of the people I've worked with for a few years, side by side on the local Interfaith Roundtable in Hanau, was Wolfgang Weber, who was a Baha'i friend. He was a change maker, a peacemaker. He was really the engine behind that Interfaith Roundtable. And then a few years ago in 2021, he unexpectedly passed away at the age of 67. That was 2 years after he retired. And when he retired from a government job, he picked up beekeeping. And after he passed away, and he's deeply connected with nature, and we often had conversations about earth stewardship. And when he passed away, his widow, his wife, decided that was part of the legacy that she needed to keep going. So she now takes care of his beehives. And I sent her a card every year for her husband's birthday. And she sends me a glass of honey every year from Wolfgang's beehives.
Yeah, it feels like there's something about nature that makes human connection so much more tender. Like getting a jar of honey every year, I don't know why that feels so tender and sweet, but there is something I think about nature and stewardship that makes our relationships feel deeper.
Yeah. I really appreciate all of your insights there. Thank you for coming and talking about those interfaith collaborations that are going on in Germany. We've got one more question for you. And that question is, where was the last place you felt a deep sense of awe and wonder?
My wife and I celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary this year, and we did so by going to Franconia in Switzerland, which is not in Switzerland at all. It's just a upland region in Franconia. I grew up nearby that area, and because we have a few hills there, and bizarre rock formations and hills and rivers, we dare to call it Franconia in Switzerland. But I was overcome by the beauty of nature there. We had a guide who took us on the hike, and at one point we stopped by a spring by a river, and he said that there's an old tale that if you drink from that spring, you will be given beauty and wisdom. Now, that was a few months ago. I'm still waiting for the long-term effects of drinking from the spring. But On a serious note, it's just almost impossible for me to be exposed to the beauty of nature and not feel deep gratitude for the creation and thereby for the creator.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Ralf. It was such a pleasure to meet you and hear your experiences. So thank you for taking this time. Okay, now we're going to transition back to Utah and we get to hear from our executive producer, Mike Maxwell. Mike is from Draper, Utah, and he is the chair of the Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship Salt Lake chapter. And we know Mike really well, but we're so excited to ask some of these questions. We haven't heard Mike's full story. So thanks for being here, Mike.
Yeah, you guys look great, by the way. Just want you to know, you're young, you're fresh, you're excited. That's an inspiration to me and all the folks that are a little further along in their lives to see the energy that all of you are bringing. But I'm
Do go on, Mike. Do go on.
I'm thrilled to be here and participate. I've known both Ralf and Merikay for a couple of years, but it was really cool to kind of get deeper into their stories.
Yeah, it's been such a cool episode so far, and we're really excited to hear your story. So, can you tell us, how did you come to become involved in Earth Stewardship, and what motivates you? Because
Yeah, for me, I mean, it started when I was a kid, I believe. I lived in a rural town in Illinois on the banks of the Mississippi River, and I spent childhood playing in forests, playing in rivers. There was a little pond where we lived. The street across from me where I lived as a kid was just woods, and my brothers and I mean, we spent endless hours in these woods just exploring and sort of eating up nature. And then when I was older, my family moved to Utah, and like mountains and deserts, this is like amazing. It was this different environment, but I just absolutely loved it and became a hiker and a skier. But through all of that, I don't know if anybody ever told me this, but to me, it just sort of absorbed into me that what I was appreciating so much was creation and things that we read about in our scripture and that we hear about in temple rituals. And so that always connected with me. I raised my kids, taking them on vacations to national parks and hiking and skiing and backcountry camping, and learned later that they felt deprived because all of their friends were going to Disneyland and resorts and stuff. And we didn't do very much of that, but
you did the good stuff, it sounds like.
well, it all depends on what you like, but I do think they enjoyed it, and I certainly enjoyed it, and it just always felt like kind of part of my discipleship. And so I had a 30-year career working for Silicon Valley technology companies. And towards the end of that, in 2023, I think it was, there was this PPRI study of American religious folks, all religions, all faiths. They asked them a lot about their connection to creation and the Creator. And Latter-day Saints ranked significantly higher than any other group in that survey on caring for the earth and really being stewards of the earth and caring for God's creation. And like, yeah, that's my people. I love that. And then I went further down in the study, and they were second to last in believing that human activity was causal to climate change. Mm-hmm. I'm like, how do we have this disconnect? And that really led me to say, is there something I can do to work on this community that on one level is incredibly connected to and appreciative of creation, but on the most salient environmental issue of our time are some of the biggest skeptics in the world. And so that drew me to LDS Earth Stewardship. I was asked to, participate in the Salt Lake chapter, and I've led that group for almost 3 years now, and joined, the board of the organization last year.
Yeah, great story.
So tell us more about that. With the Salt Lake area chapter is on fire, in my not so humble opinion. And some of the most interesting stuff to me is your interfaith collaborations that are happening in Salt Lake area. Tell us more about it.
I would say that's the highlight of the local chapter. I've found that so incredibly gratifying. Shortly after I got involved with Earth Stewardship, we started going to a lot of community events and meetings, and I got acquainted with a couple of different folks. A woman named Joan Gregory from the Unitarian Church in Salt Lake City, and a woman named Becky Burridge, who comes from a Methodist congregation. And they had just conceived this idea of, let's bring an interfaith group together, but let's have it really focus on the Great Salt Lake. The Great Salt Lake in Utah, for those of you that aren't from the Western U.S. listening, is in a real state of crisis. It's an inland saline lake, really critical to a healthy ecosystem in Utah. The lake protects us from toxic chemicals that are gathered in the lake bed for centuries, and really key to producing lake effect snow. So the snow that falls in our mountains and valleys, a significant portion of that is because the lake is there. And if the lake were not there, we would have less snow, which means less water in this semi-arid climate. And we would also be suffering from terrible toxic dust in the air. So these two had conceived this idea, let's do something to bring all the faith communities together. And we just got talking, and they were interested in having a Latter-day Saint participation in that. And I think I was the person they knew that had that Latter-day Saint identity. And so we engaged with the group, and we've just really become a team. We work on service projects together. We work on education events together. And Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship doesn't do, government lobbying, but some of those organizations do, and they appreciate that we are supportive of them, even though we ourselves are not going to go out and get involved directly in any legislative activity. But it all comes from this common foundation in all of our faith traditions that calls us to care for the earth. My Jewish friends and other Christian denominations and Buddhists, and we have Native American faith leaders, there is a call in all of their faith traditions and scripture and theologies to care for creation, and we all bond on that and work together on it.
Yeah, you've mentioned a lot of different faith traditions. Are there any specific people, or could you tell us about some specific people that you've met through this work and things that you've learned from them?
Yeah, well, there's this woman named Joan Gregory that I just have the utmost respect for. She is part of the Unitarian congregation in Salt Lake City, and she's probably a decade or two older than I am. I will tell you that nobody brings more energy to environmental issues, probably in Utah, than Joan. I would say every government elected official knows her. She's known in all the faith communities. She's known in all the environmental communities. And she's just one of these wonderful people that is she's an Energizer bunny. She's just always out there working, and I have so much respect for her. And for her, again, it's just drawn from her 70 plus years of living her Unitarian faith and really this belief in taking care of the earth and the planet. So I always give Joan big props and think of her probably first anytime I think of somebody that is really deeply engaged in this mission.
I gotta meet her. She sounds amazing.
Shout out to Joan Gregory.
Yeah. I'll make sure she listens to this episode. Yeah. Joan, we were talking about you.
Yeah. All good things, Joan. What do you think in all these different collaborative projects that you've done with the different local faith groups? Have there been any experiences in those projects where you thought this was a watershed moment kind of project?
Yeah, I'll say there was a couple of them. We did an event out at Great Salt Lake the day before Easter this year, and we combined commemoration of Earth Day with Easter, and got about 100 people out to Great Salt Lake, and we did kind of a combined lakeshore cleanup with an Easter celebration. We had an Easter egg hunt. We had some sustainable Easter food and decor activities that were really designed for kids. And then we also got different groups going out to the South Lakeshore and doing cleanup. And so it really brought together this really commemorative part of our Christian faith tradition with this community tradition of sanctifying a day to go work on Earth Stewardship. It was just a wonderful community gathering. It was a beautiful day. Removed hundreds of pounds of garbage, but we just got this diverse cross-section of our community together to go do some work, and also for those that wanted to. Not everybody wanted to participate in the Easter exercises, but those that did, I think, had a really nice time. Elizabeth Soja, who was our chapter
Service coordinator.
Yeah, thank you. She just went beyond the extra mile putting this together. It was a far bigger project than any of us ever realized, and had a bunch of complexities emerge that nobody ever anticipated. But I think we pulled off an event that was really memorable, and I run into people in our local community who were there, and they still bring it up and say that was really special. So that one comes to mind. The second one was something we did through the Great Salt Lake Coalition. We had a film festival at the Cathedral of the Madeleine, which is the large, gorgeous, ornate, old Catholic cathedral in downtown Salt Lake City. Brigham Young had given, the Catholics this plot of land and said, bring your faith here, bring your people here. And they built this gorgeous cathedral that's been there for 130 years. But we had a film festival dedicated to the Great Salt Lake in this building. And we're in this gorgeous, you've all been in Catholic cathedrals probably, really, this Gothic style decor, candles burning, and this ornate rostrum with an organ. And they put up a big screen, and we showed some local filmmakers' work on calls to recover the Great Salt Lake. People from all different walks of life were there. I actually had one person come up to me a few months after that, and this was someone from an environmental organization. She introduces herself to me as someone who did not grow up religious, had literally never been in a church before. And she had this experience in the Cathedral of the Madeleine, and she told me that's the most spiritually connected I've ever felt in my life, was that experience. That just touched me because I have spiritual experiences and things connected to nature, and I thought it was just some beautiful feedback we received.
Yeah, those are great. Those are such beautiful stories. So what would you say is the vision for how interfaith connections can change our community?
There's this common ground. It really comes down to everybody wants clean air. Everybody needs ample water. And for some people, their theology or their faith tradition calls them to that. For other people, it's just part of their lived experience. They just see it and feel it. And sometimes in a very spiritual way, even though they don't have a connection to any kind of traditional religious practice or organization. But it's a common ground we can find with everybody. And with so much division, and particularly in our political arena right now, that's a place that people can meet and say, we all agree that finding a pathway to do this better, air and water and clean, affordable energy and some of those kinds of things, that's a place that we can all meet.
Yeah, the health of the earth is so integral to the health of the community and every individual in the community. So I think that's a beautiful vision.
Mike, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us. All of the thoughts that have been shared from our interviewees, really, because as we know, given the events of the past few weeks, interfaith connections and people working together in their community, I think it's never been more important to be reminded of, and the joy that comes from it.
Yeah, my wife Marcia and I were invited through the work with the Interfaith Coalition to a Jewish Sabbat last fall. And the invitation came before the October tragedy in Israel, where a terrorist group crossed the border and murdered a whole bunch of people. And we attended their Shabbat service a couple of weeks after that. Of course, there was police presence everywhere. It was just a special thing to go and worship with these people at this time of tragedy. And so we're recording this just for the audience. It was about 5 days after the shooting at the Latter-day Saint Stake Center in Michigan. And some of those same people, including Helene, who was the one that had invited me from the Jewish congregation. I was corresponding with this week, and shared, the same sentiment that they didn't know if I knew anybody that was part of that Michigan congregation, but they knew I was a Latter-day Saint, and we were all hurting. Sorry, I get a little emotional. I don't do that very often, but it was really touching to have that brought to us. And I think that's the best of what our faith traditions can yield in what we do. So, yeah, sorry, Phil, you made me tear up. I'm going to be mad at you now with your response, but it was a beautiful thing that this week that came out of a real tragedy for us.
Yeah. So, and thank you for sharing all your thoughts about the importance of interfaith dialogue, but also collaboration and being engaged in action on Earth stewardship. Our last question for you is, how has your commitment to Earth stewardship brought you closer to God?
I think for me, they're the same thing. I feel like I worship a God that created all the living things around us, and to have a relationship with God is to have an honorable and caretaking relationship with all the living things and try to live your life that way.
Amen. I'm just like, yeah, you said it so beautifully, so clearly.
Amen.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike, for your time today and for all you do behind the scenes to make Holy Earth happen and to care for the earth too.
And now it's time for listener feedback. We're so excited. We've got some in. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you all for sending all of the messages of support and of comments and feedback on the episode so far. So I want to share a beautiful message we received from Chris D. Chris D says, I've just finished listening to episodes 0 and 1 of Holy Earth. They're lovely. I'm excited to hear more. Hearing about the misunderstanding of the description of human dominion of Earth and about recentering the focus onto balance and stewardship of all things was really helpful. I've also heard many people justify the exploitation of the Earth to use the gift as much as possible, so the entire section has given me some tools for rebutting that claim in the future. Dr. Hanley's point that overusing is the opposite of helping people really helped it click as well, then that's not the appropriate way to show respect for the gift. I really like that perspective, and I would say that it's a common myth I think we share, that we have this false choice between exploiting and extraction to the extreme and not doing anything at all, and this idea between conservation and use of the Lord's resources that have been given to us is some sort of binary decision, and Dr. Hanley really help us dispel that myth. So I really, really appreciate that. And I agree wholeheartedly, Chris. It's a really good, poignant point that you bring up. So Lydia, you took George Hanley's class at some points, and so I imagine that as a student, you have many thoughts about this in your classes.
Yeah, well, during the episode, I referred to this idea of what dominion means, and I was trying to remember where I read that, and I found the essay. It's actually a Hugh Nibley essay called Subduing the Earth. Subduing the Earth, Man's Dominion. It is so, so cool. And yeah, he talks about how the word dominus comes from this idea of the caretaker, the person who provides the bread for the people that are under his stewardship, and also he connects the idea of dominion with the priesthood and the power of God to act for God and in his place as a caretaker. And he uses the phrase generous host, that's what a caretaker, that's what it means to be caring for the earth. To have dominion over the earth means to be in charge of providing for all the creatures of the earth, which is just such a beautiful idea. And I love that idea of, like, if you have a gift from a person, using it in a way that makes it unable to be used in the future doesn't really make sense. That's not how we accept gifts. And if you have other people in your life that you want to share that gift with, doing it sustainably is the only way to do it. So I love Chris's comments. I was really grateful to receive those.
Yeah. Thanks for your message, Chris. Really appreciate it.
We would love to hear from anyone else. We have gotten so many great comments and we read every single one. It's so encouraging and so exciting to hear. And whether you agree with us or have differing opinions, we want to hear all of it. We want to hear questions, thoughts, concerns. We just want to create a community where we can support each other as Earth stewards. So please reach out to us by commenting on YouTube or Spotify or emailing us at hello@holyearthpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok at Holy Earth Podcast.
And if you have suggestions for people we need to have on and have conversations with, please let us know. And if you want to get involved with Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship, visit our website at ldsearthstewardship.org and sign up for our newsletter.
Holy Earth is brought to you by Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship, a 501c3 nonprofit with the support of a generous donation from the Nature Conservancy. Our executive producer is Michael Maxwell, and our producer is Marcia Maxwell. Our theme music was composed and performed by Lydia Theobald. Our logo and graphic design are by Annie Peterson. Our social media coordinator is Chloe Mills.